Okay, just a quick vid showing how I shorten screws. Probably more than one way to do this. But got these cabinet screws that came with the handles that are too long. I actually gave two sets of screws. Two short ones, two long ones, and the short ones are too short and the long ones are too long. Now some cabinet screws are the size 8x32, and there are a lot of wire cutters out there that have a little screw cutter built into them that you can usually put an 832 in. These are metric. Metric are a little bit more expensive to come by, and I didn't want to buy a whole huge box of metric screws, so I'm cutting a few of them, and here's how I do it. Now, you're going to need a few things. Most importantly, there's no way you can do this without finding a threaded nut that will fit on the screw. It needs to be so. You know, when I grew up, every man had a coffee can in his garage full of screws and bolts and spare hardware. So I went out in the garage and found a couple of nuts that I had that happened to be this same metric size, which these are 4mm threaded screws. So you absolutely have to have the nut, and here's how you do it. You screw a nut on the screw first. You're going to need some sort of cutter that will cut the screw. I've got these little cutters here that I've had forever that will do the job. And then you're going to need a screwdriver and a wrench or pliers or something. I'll show you that piece. But basically, you have to put this nut on first. Once that nut is threaded on, go ahead and cut the screw at whatever length you've measured and determined you need it to be. Now, how I do this, hopefully you can see that, is I don't just cut right through the screw because it tends to squash the tip a little bit and can be harder. So what I'll do is I'll sort of apply pressure on the cutter, and then I'll just keep going around it. So I create a little cut circle around the screw, and it ends up with a bit more of a rounder cut. And I just find that it ends up working out better. So I'm kind of going around it, around it, around it. And then once I've done it a bunch, I can cut it off. And it's a little bit more of a rounded cut. Now you also ideally have a little file so that you can get rid of the burr that you leave on top of that screw, which I'll just do like this, turning the screw around, dragging the file back and forth. And that's not only so I don't cut myself when I'm messing with it, but also so it doesn't shred up whatever you're screwing it into. Just something I do. So now that I've smoothed it out and I've got this nut on it, that nut is going to repair the threads so that I can actually get this screwed in to something again. So the way I do that is you can either grab that nut with like a pair of pliers, or you know, maybe even, it might be a little tricky, but a little wrench like this. I've been using a little socket that's that size. Any of those will do. So now that you're holding that nut secure, it's all about backing that screw out of that nut to repair the threads. But because in repairing the threads, you're sometimes going to tear off little tiny bits of metal, I sort of get it to the very end there. It won't come off now because those threads are trashed from getting cut. I sort of go back and forth with a screwdriver, and sometimes this takes a lot of pressure to do it, but you'll still be able to do it. So I'm trying to unscrew it where it stops, and it feels like it won't go anymore, so I'm gonna have to work it quite a bit. And then you just go back in, don't take it all off at once. Unscrew it a little bit, put it back in. It sounds a little adult, doesn't it? And then I'll clean the threads a little bit with my fingertips so that there's no shavings in there. They're gonna shred up that nut and make it unusable. And I'll just keep doing that a few times. It seems a little tedious and this kind of methodical method, but it works really well. So I'm just going back and forth and cleaning up those threads by backing it off of that nut. Now I've taken it all the way out, or almost. And I'll actually put put it back in again, because see, now it doesn't want to go, so it's still not totally cleaned up. So I'll just go back in and thread it in and out a couple of times to make sure it's good and cleaned up. And once that nut has cleaned up the threads, it should go into that handle pretty well. I said it's kind of tedious, but do it a few times and the threads are cleaned up. And then here's that handle. And there it goes, threads right into the handle. Kind of a pain, but if you have no other choice and you've got that nut the same size as the machine threads that you need to cut, you've got a chance. If you need to repair something, you've got a long screw and a nut and a cutter. Save you a trip to the hardware store. That's it.